Hello and welcome to The Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the 1987 story arc, Spider-Man: Kraven's Last Hunt. It might seem like the distant past to some, but really the time of colonialism was really not that long ago. Particularly the scramble for Africa, as various European countries raced to be the ones to colonize the most of the African continent. This scramble bred a fascination among the people of Western countries towards this strange, quote-unquote, and unconquered land, eventually inspiring new stories and folk heroes on the misperception of what the African deserts and jungles were really like. And perhaps the most famous of those was Alan Quatermain. If you're watching this channel, chances are you probably know Quatermain best as a character from the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but he did star in a series of novels about his adventures in Africa that portrayed the continent as one of magic, mystery, and treasure. Quatermain and stories like his would undoubtedly be a major influence in the development of Kraven the Hunter. Sergei Kravinoff first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 15 as a big game hunter who had made his name by achieving extraordinary feats in Africa, with abilities, strength, and senses he gained through magical means from an African shaman. Kraven was invited by his best friend and later revealed half-brother, Dmitry Smirtikov, aka the Chameleon, to come to New York and hunt the most dangerous game. Undoubtedly a reference to another major influence of Kraven's, the Russian big game hunter General Zaroff, from the short story The Most Dangerous Game. For Kraven, that game wouldn't just be man, but Spider-Man. Only Spidey would, of course, prove too great a challenge for Kraven in the end. That failure wouldn't stop Kraven from immediately returning for Spidey's first annual as a member of the original Sinister Six to try his hand again. And he would continue coming after Spidey again from time to time, all the way up to today's story. By this point, Kraven is a man obsessed, having devoted the entirety of his life to proving himself Spider-Man's superior. But what would happen if Kraven finally actually managed to defeat his greatest foe? Well, writer J.M. Dematteis and artist Mike Zeck explore that question in what is often considered one of the most powerful, impactful, and important stories in all of Spider-Man's history. It was such an impactful story that it ran across all three Spidey titles of the time, just so no other Spider-Man stories would interfere with it. So, let's find out what answer they gave to this burning question, and take this away. The comic opens on Kraven the Hunter, who's on the hunt, of course, proving to us that he's super strong and super naked, as he kills his way through some hunting trophies. Wow, yeah, very impressed that you can kill already dead animals. Once he's done picking on defenseless dead things, he dons his mighty fancy looking robe, and I love that it has a design on it similar to Spider-Man's webbing. Those of you who watched my Secret Wars video know that I'm already a Mike Zeck fan, but he still really outdoes himself here. His highly detailed art, noir-like sensibilities for camera angles, and dark, grimy coloring really so perfectly set the exact mood and tone for this story to match Dematteis' equally brooding and philosophical writing. And there's tons of these little details that really make this work. Like how even the stained glass windows here look like Spider-Man. So it's like the hero is always vigilant and watching Kraven, hanging over his head like the sword of Damocles. And as if the interior art wasn't good enough, Zeck's art especially knocks it out of the park with the absolutely iconic covers he does for these issues. I normally don't even talk about issue covers, but these are worth mentioning at the least. Kraven's inner monologue lets us know that he comes from Russian nobility, but his family was forced out of the country during the 1917 revolutions, which, even if he was a child at the time, that would put him well into his 70s. It's not directly stated, but maybe a little implied, that the same magic herbs that give him his powers might also be extending his life. But even those have their limits, and Kraven realizes he cannot be long for this world. It's not his outfit in the coffin he seems to have ready for this occasion though, but Spider-Man's. The image of death is heavily prevalent throughout this story for probably obvious reasons, but not just with this opening coffin. One of Kraven's servants is shown in this first story in various panels that end a number of pages digging out a grave, slowly getting deeper and deeper into the ground. And Spider-Man's first appearance in this story is him showing up to the funeral of a man with the unlikely name of Joe Face. Spidey is wearing his black suit, and not because he's in mourning, though, I mean, he kind of is, but that's not why. It's important to note that this isn't the Venom suit. By this point, Spidey had rid himself of the symbiote, but had fashioned himself a black suit that looked like it and wore that for a time instead of his normal red and blues. I will always be a fan of the classic Spidey look above all else, but I'll admit that the black suit does just work for this story so much better. It's also fairly appropriate since Zeck was essentially the man who debuted it for us back in Secret Wars. Anyway, Face was a small-time crook that Spider-Man had busted before on multiple occasions, and though he could be the kind of person that isn't bothered by the man's death, Spidey can't help caring and shows up to the funeral to pay both his respects and some money towards the man's funeral costs. And while I do love Zeck's art in general and did literally just finish gushing over it, not everything is a winner. Like, what is up with this Spidey pose? Something definitely went wrong here. Spidey doesn't know it, but Kraven is once again preparing to take him down. And this time, Kraven's attempting to get into the right mindset by getting into a tank filled with spiders and feasting on them. It's nasty and just weird. Pete seems to have a nightmare about this, and yeah, that would give me nightmares, and goes back out into the night to clear his mind, only to end up getting shot by a dart that he was too distracted to dodge. And since there's some kind of poison on that dart, it further slows him down enough for Kraven to throw a weighted net on him. I adored the not exactly subtle addition of having all of this happen in front of a giant Raid advertisement. Those Raid Kill Bugs Dead commercials were everywhere in the late 80s. Though I guess this means Dematteis is making the mistake of every spider villain in assuming that spiders are bugs. Which they're not. They're arachnids. Learning that his attacker is Kraven, Spidey expects a long speech and an overly complicated plan, but instead of that, Kraven simply pulls a rifle, takes aim, and fires at point-blank range. We then cut to a funeral on Kraven's palatial estate, with Spidey in the casket and the attendees only Kraven and a few of his servants. They lay Spidey to rest in that hole we saw being dug the whole issue, burying him to the narration of a modified version of the poem The Tiger by William Blake, with Tiger obviously changed to Spider. This will be another recurring theme throughout the story. We move into the next issue to see the fancy gravestone Kraven built for Spider-Man and a rat at the grave, which will be yet another piece of recurring symbolism, and I'll get to why in a minute. But the good news is, Spidey is fine. See, he's standing there in front of his own grave. Except fake out, it's actually Kraven, wearing Spidey's suit. But he's not just wearing Spidey's suit. Kraven starts crawling around like he is a spider, attempting to get into the mind of the spider. To further enhance the experience, he drinks one of his special herbal concoctions that give him his strength, and this one seems to cause a hallucination where the spiders from the tank that he was in earlier seem to bust their way out and form into a giant spider entity that Kraven then wrestles with. As weird and psychedelic as this scene would have been in 1987, it's actually pretty fascinating to look back on it now after Straczynski and Slott have developed the concept of the spider totem, and the other, in this sort of mythological concept of a spider essence, essentially, that fills the spider person in each universe with its power and grants them their abilities. The entire concept fits in so well with what's happening here that we could basically retcon this to say that Kraven's obsession has allowed him to tap into the spider totem and gain some of the powers of the spider. As Kraven is having his drug-induced spider dream, we check in on the rainy streets of New York, where a cannibal killer is on the loose, and attacking his latest victim, dragging the poor woman into the sewers to consume her. The killer is Vermin, a by this point still mostly mysterious villain. Vermin was a man that had been mutated by Captain America villains Baron Zemo and Arnim Zola into a rat-like monster, leading us to our rat theme. The last time he had shown up, it had taken the combined efforts of both Spider-Man and Captain America for him to be stopped, which we saw in an issue of Marvel Team Up with an issue cover that was, certainly a choice. But now he's on the loose again, and though he's somewhat fearful of the pain that Spider-Man once caused him, he is on the hunt again, and even determined to return to the surface to prove that he's not afraid actually. Which gives us what has to be probably the most intentionally funny moment of the story, as Vermin considers proving himself to be brave by coming out of the sewer, only to be scared off immediately by an actual spider. That light little visual joke always gets me. Zeck really sells it with the eyes. Also happening at this moment is Mary Jane, who recently married Peter Parker, sitting around her apartment worrying over where the heck Peter is, afraid that he might be lying dead somewhere. Oh girl, if only you knew. Against her better judgment, she decides to go out looking for him, only to be attacked by a couple dudes because she took a shot at their manhood earlier. But this is MJ, so she's of course saved by the amazing Spider-Man. Only this Spider-Man treats his prey with extra brutality and scurries away when she finally begs him to stop, leaving MJ to immediately know that whoever this Spider-Man is, it's not her Peter. Because not content with just understanding the mind of the spider, Kraven is obsessed with becoming the spider. So he has gone out to hunt as the spider does, and that includes stopping that mugging, and further stopping a major drug deal in progress. Without MJ around to beg for the lives of these men, Kraven does not stop his brutality and even goes so far as to snap the neck of one of the dealers. And just in case you were uncertain about the lethality, the cops confirm it for us a minute later. But while Kraven has had success at achieving the results of the spider, he's not content. He feels the need to go beyond that and do more than the spider could. And that means one last hunt. A hunt for Vermin. Since Spidey's only previous encounter with Vermin was that team up with Cap, it means Spidey was never able to stop the villain solo. So to prove himself Spider-Man's superior, Kraven heads into the sewers still dressed in the black costume. Vermin confirms Kraven's belief that the creature almost managed to defeat Spider-Man in that previous story, and only failed because Captain America was also there. And then the two fight. The battle is pretty brutal, with lots of biting and slashing and splashing, but in the end, Kraven's single-minded obsession takes over and he's able to beat Vermin into unconsciousness. Kraven then carries the Rat Man out of the sewers, off to destinations unknown, in a visual callback to Captain America striking the same pose and doing the same thing after defeating Vermin in his first appearance, in an issue also written and drawn by Dematteis and Zeck. But before we get to where they end up, we see a Spider-Hand bursting from the grave. Yes, Spider-Man, the real Spider-Man, is alive. In another psychedelic sequence, we take a look inside his mind to see him floating in an empty void. Empty until he's joined by Ned Leeds, the original Hobgoblin and longtime friend of Peter, who had died in a story just a few months before this. When Peter points out that Ned is dead, Ned realizes that Pete's right and simply crumbles into dust, causing Pete to withdraw back into himself again. But then he starts imagining himself as a spider crawling through tunnels and beset by demons that kill him. Only again, he's not stopped, and he bursts out of that spider corpse as a man and begins reliving his death at the hands of Kraven over and over again until he bursts forth out of the grave. Awake now, Spidey stumbles his way into Kraven's mansion, where he discovers from some newspapers that he's been missing for 2 weeks. In anger and frustration, Spidey unknowingly mimics Kraven's earlier actions of fighting through the Hunter's stuffed menagerie, but unable to find his enemy, Spidey turns and leaves for home. He reunites with a relieved MJ, but he doesn't stay for long. Despite his body, mind, and voice still being weak from the time he spent supposedly dead, Spidey feels that he can't rest until he's made Kraven pay for what he did. And no matter how much MJ tries to insist that he should stay, he still leaves her and heads into the night. See, Pete, this is why you're not married anymore. Spidey returns to Kraven's manor, and this time he does find his foe, but though he comes ready for a fight, Kraven isn't interested in fighting back. He says there's no need now because he finally won. Not only did he kill and bury Spider-Man, even if that kill was actually just drugging Spider-Man into a state that resembled death, but he also not only took Spider-Man's place, but became Spider-Man's superior. To prove this last bit, after stripping down and donning his normal outfit, he brings Spidey down to the basement, where he reveals that he has trapped Vermin in an electrified cage. We know it's electrified because we've repeatedly been shown Vermin attempting to break out of it, but despite all of his rage, he's still just a rat man in a cage. Feeling that this achievement shows that he has managed what Spidey never could, Kraven revels in his victory, taunting the poor Vermin and even jumping atop a stuffed elephant to roar for no real reason. The guy has clearly lost all of his marbles at this point. All he really succeeds at doing right now is making Spider-Man angry. But again, instead of fighting, Kraven simply releases Vermin. He then proceeds to rile the poor man creature up, blaming Spider-Man for Vermin's misery, even though it was Kraven disguised as Spider-Man that actually attacked him. Vermin's not willing to listen to reason though, and attacks Spider-Man in his confusion. But Spidey is full of his own uncaged rage, enough so that he's able to overcome his opponent. But realizing his anger is really directed at Kraven, he manages to stop himself before actually hurting Vermin too much. Which is unfortunate because Vermin doesn't back down, and uses Spidey's temporary pause to attack again. This time, it's Kraven who intervenes, stopping Vermin before he can kill the spider, and telling Vermin to run free. Kraven helps Spider-Man up and in much the same manner tells him to also leave. Spidey starts to say that he's not going to let Kraven get away with this, but Kraven knows Spidey can't let the so-called cannibal killer roam free. And he also promises that Kraven will never hunt again, which is a lot more ominous of a statement than Spidey realizes. So Pete takes off to capture Vermin, leaving Kraven behind. The Hunter, feeling his life's work finally complete, chooses to embrace the death he said was coming for him at the beginning of the story, doing to himself what we learned earlier his mother also did to herself after years of being trapped away from her homeland. Kraven leaves behind a letter to the police, confessing to the brutal activities he got up to during the 2 weeks Spider-Man was missing, clearing the vigilante's name. Spidey, meanwhile, enters the sewers in pursuit of Vermin, not only wanting to stop him, but also wanting to help him. The two fight each other while also battling their own new fears. Spidey struggling with claustrophobia after 2 weeks of being buried alive, and Vermin with the fear of being hurt and attacked again. So Spidey, not wanting to hurt Vermin too much, tries a new tactic. He leads Vermin on a chase out into the city above. While the rest of the story has taken place on rainy nights, it is now a bright new day. There, in the light and noise and traffic of the city, Vermin is overwhelmed, allowing Spidey to easily web him up and secure him for the police. He promises Vermin that he'll contact Reed Richards to seek help for Vermin's condition, and though Vermin swears he doesn't want Spidey's help, Spidey says he's gonna get it anyway as he swings away. Pete then returns home to Mary Jane, the lovebirds finally reunited. Meanwhile, we've been seeing this whole final issue the same servant from the first issue digging yet another grave on Kraven's estate. This one right next to Spider-Man's grave. But this time, it's for the Hunter himself, to also be buried to a repetition of the altered words of Blake's poem. And on that fearful symmetry, we'll dig into the breakdown. I grew up on Dematteis writing Amazing Spider-Man, and his run, especially with Mark Bagley doing the art, will probably always be my #1 S-tier Spidey run. While a lot of big names in the 80s were making waves in the comic book world with their substance, like Frank Miller or Chris Claremont, I feel like Dematteis was making waves with his style. Or maybe that's the other way around. It was from books like this one that we saw the change really happening away from narration boxes of an omniscient narrator as the writer describing what was happening in the story with characters' inner monologues appearing in speech bubbles or thought clouds, to the narration of the story being the character's own brooding inner monologue and let the art for the story really speak for the action on its own. And with Zeck's capable pencils leading the way, I feel this story excels at that kind of storytelling in a way few comics, even others from Dematteis, managed to achieve. Not that there wouldn't be imitators. This style would become essentially the dominant form of comic book storytelling up until the age of Bendis, who would again bring a major change with a more cinematic style to the format. And look, I can't say with any kind of certainty that it was Dematteis alone that brought about this style change. I think we were seeing this shift happening in comic books already. But I can say that this story specifically played a major role in that shift, and with its beautifully told and tragic story, it's easy to see why it had a major impact. Not that I don't have complaints. Like I said, Zeck's art can occasionally be a little weird. There are several parts that don't really make any sense, and I'm pretty sure they aren't really supposed to. There's a lot of extreme violence to animals for no clear reason, and it's almost weird just how dark and brooding this story is in a title that is often a little more lighthearted and fun. Spidey cracks a lot of jokes, you know? But that last bit, I think, was actually brilliantly played, and having Kraven be the primary point of view focus for the story, and the surprising fortune of having the death of Ned Leeds occur so recently before this. It really gave such a stronger reason for such a mood change from Spidey. So I'm giving this series a recommendation level of very high. Let's face it, any weaknesses this story has are basically just nitpicky, and this is one of those graphic novels that should easily make any must-read list. The collected edition gets 1 pot of money, which is a good thing. I'm using the Marvel Select Edition, which includes a nice long introduction from J.M. Dematteis explaining his thought process and influence in creating this story, as well as a huge gallery of penciled pages from Mike Zeck, and even some bonus covers from other versions of the collection. So yes, I'm basically that meme of Fry shouting for Marvel to take my money. Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I thought this would make for a nice transition from my annual Spider-Man month of September to spooky October. Also, I guess there's like a movie coming out, sort of. I'm sure it'll be great. I'll not hold my breath on that. Anyway, if you're watching from the future, tell me what you thought of the movie. Otherwise, tell me what you think of this series. Do you think it deserves the high praise I have for it? Or tell me what you had for lunch, cause food is good. Basically just leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and all those things so you can help the channel out, and so you can help yourself out to be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here, in the Comic Cave.